So we're going to kick off this evening, which I'm personally excited for. It should be a lot of fun. And first, before we start, I just want to thank, once again, all of our sponsors that make the MIT Enterprise Forum and events like this possible. We have Stradling, Bank of the West, Radius Group, CompuVision, Riviera, Nassif Hicks Harris, IdeaCore, Vices, Express, Business Times, DuPont, Almarosa, Mission Ventures, and NewsHawk. And if I omitted you, I apologize. I didn't mean to. So tonight we've got a pretty interesting program that I think is very timely. It's the music industry is moving and shaking. And we have as our speaker Tom Conrad, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Pandora. And it's a company that he will tell you a lot more about, but many of you probably use Pandora already. So what I'd like to do right now is turn this over to Tom.
So I think I'll stand here so I can pace a little bit instead of hide behind the podium. Thanks so much for coming. I've been doing a few of these. Maybe I should start by apologizing that Tim Westergren, who's Pandora's founder, who was originally scheduled to be here, who is much better looking than I am and generally more engaging, was really sorry that he couldn't be here. So I flew down this afternoon to sub in for him. And you're welcome. I feel really lucky to have the opportunity. I have been doing these, though, for quite a while, and recently did one for the University of Michigan Alumni Club. I'm a Michigan graduate, and when I arrived at the event, I was talking to some people at the cocktail hour beforehand, and we didn't have the nice little name badges that you guys provided, and this guy comes up to me, he's wearing a suit, and he says, "You must be the speaker because only the speaker would have the guts to show up dressed that casually." So I clearly haven't learned my lesson, but I appreciate it that you put up with a bit of a casual kind of vibe. So what I want to do is spend some time kind of telling you a little bit about the story of Pandora, where we came from, what we're trying to do, what some of the challenges we've faced have been, a little bit about our little corner of the music universe. So my background is I started my career working on the Macintosh at Apple. I spent 4 years at Apple in the early 90s. Working on the Mac user interface, and then I was technical director for this video game series called You Don't Know Jack in the mid-90s. That was a bit of a hit. I've done some enterprise software stuff that's phenomenally boring, and I won't go into the details. I also ran engineering at pets.com, so I nearly destroyed the US economy by myself. Immediately prior to Pandora, I had been working for an enterprise software company that was particularly boring and soul-sucking, and decided that the next thing that I wanted to do was something that I was really kind of personally connected to and passionate about, and started thinking about kind of what are the problems in my own life, what kinds of things would I like to sort of use technology to solve. And I've had sort of a lifelong passion for music, sort of particularly collecting music, and like nothing better, frankly, than to sort of trap you in front of my stereo and say, oh, if you like, The Cure, you've got to hear this band, The Glove, which is Robert Smith, and, Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees, and, bore you that very specific way in my living room. And so 5 years ago, I started thinking about, well, is there a way that I could, torture 10 or 20 or 30 million people at a time rather than just one? And so I started thinking about sort of music recommendation, music community, and telling some potential investors and things about some of my ideas up in San Francisco, where I live. And one of them said, you should really go to Oakland and talk to this guy, Tim Westergren, about what he's been doing for the last, I guess at that point it had been 4 years. So I went and I met Tim, and Tim told me about this thing, the Music Genome Project. So when he had finished studying musicology at Stanford and had spent his early years sort of touring the country in a band, in a van, sort of eking out an existence around music performance, he was reading this article in the New York Times that was talking about Amy Mann. I don't know if you guys know Amy Mann, but maybe You remember her from the soundtrack for the movie Magnolia. And this was before Magnolia had come out, though, and she was really struggling to find an audience, and she's fantastically talented. And the story was about, you have someone like Amy Mann in the age of the internet. It's a shame that there's no way to connect Amy to her fans and, people who would love Amy's music to her art. And so Tim started thinking about, well, what could we do? What could we build to help bridge that gap? How to help connect fans with artists and artists with fans? And he had spent some time recently scoring film. And one of the things that he was noticing is that he talked to a director about the kinds of music that they wanted in the film. They would describe through examples the kinds of music that they like. They would say, like, we want something that sounds like Jumpin' Jack Flash. We can't afford Jumpin' Jack Flash, so something that sounds like that. And it dawned on him that an important part of musical taste is derived actually from how the music sounds, the particular musicology. This is someone who has, a master's degree in musicology. He thought, gee, it's interesting that the way the music sounds is a predictor of taste. Which maybe seems obvious, but at the time, like, a lot of the people that were building recommendation systems for music were really focused around sort of statistical analysis of purchase patterns, people who bought also bought, that kind of thing that you see all the time. And he thought, well, what if we created something that understood the music itself and then used the underlying sort of musical characteristics as the principal mechanism for connecting people? And so he teamed up with some technologists, and they started to investigate what it would take to analyze the musicology of songs and make recommendations based on that understanding. And in the beginning, they looked at, can we write a piece of software that will examine the waveform of the song, extracting musical characteristics, and use that as the basis for the system. And they quickly discovered that the sort of state of the art in what we call machine listening, especially 10 years ago, but even today, is still extremely experimental. I think today, a state-of-the-art sort of machine listening system can maybe extract 30 or 40 different attributes from the music, which is really kind of insufficient to fully understand the nuances at work in a piece of music. And so they said, well, if we can't do it with software, how else might we do it? And I think they probably also said, what would be the most ridiculous approach we could possibly take that would be the most expensive and the most unfundable? And they decided that they should hire professional musicians to come into the office every day, put headphones on, listen to each and every song, spend 20 or 40 minutes on every song, painstakingly categorizing 400 different musicological attributes at work in the song. So not just are there guitars, but what kind of guitars, how are the guitars played, what role does the guitar play in the overall composition. There are 40 different attributes that describe the vocal performance. How gravelly is the vocal, how breathy is the vocal, how much falsetto is used, is it male, is it female. And so in the middle of 2000, they analyzed their first song, Dancing Queen by ABBA. And I wasn't there. I was doing, windingdownpets.com or something at the time. And, but I can't really imagine how that moment felt. It's like, woohoo, one done. 9,800,000 to go. But that's what they did. And for the first 4 years of the company, they were sort of painstakingly building this catalog of hand-analyzed music. Really with this dream of solving that original problem, how do we connect artists with their fans and fans with artists? And the founding technical team, though, they were kind of almost like a professional services group, a little more, not so product-oriented, but they were very sort of sales-driven. And so Tim would go out, God bless him, and he would go to anybody and everybody in the music value chain and say, we have this music genome project. It knows how to do recommendations. How can we work together? And Best Buy would say, well, we have this problem where our competitors let you listen to CDs in the store before you make a purchase, and we need CD listening stations. Could you do that? And Tim would say, could it also do music recommendations? And they go, yeah, that'd be okay. And he'd go, yeah, we can do that. And so he'd come back and he'd say, we have to build kiosks for Best Buy. And the company built kiosks for Best Buy, and even designed the brackets that mounted them to the display units. And then he would go to Tower Records, and they'd say, well, it's not so much about recommendation for us, but we want to educate people about jazz because we think we have a real opportunity for serving the jazz community. And if we can expand the jazz community, make more people fall in love with jazz, we'll have even more opportunities. Could you make a website for us that taught people about how jazz works? Tim would go, could we put a little recommendation in? And they go, yeah, that'd be okay. We don't really. And so we go, yeah, we can do that. So the company built that. And we did more kiosks for Borders, and we did APIs for AOL, and a website for Barnes & Noble, and sort of on, these sort of one-off projects all built on top of the Music Genome Project. And in 2004, there was an incredibly dark period in here where this is the worst possible time to have started a company. And it was essentially unfundable through this entire period. So Tim was, this sort of, literally paying, payroll and his credit cards and things. Then there was a long period where the company, as employees, 6 or 7 people, went completely without salary, just continued to do it because they believed in the core concept. It's the sort of hardest luck startup story you've ever heard. But on the backs of getting these sort of marquee brand name customers in place, in 2004, a guy named Larry Marcus at Walden Ventures met with Tim and decided to invest $8 million in the company. And I speak specifically about Larry because I think it's popular amongst the group of startup peers that all sort of got started in the 2004 era that led to the kind of resurgence of the consumer internet, to kind of badmouth venture investment, to say, oh, do it in your basement, do it for nothing, bootstrap it, sell it to Yahoo for $40 million before you take any money from the venture guys. With the implication being that nothing good could come from taking venture money. And our experience at many turns has been that both the financing that the venture community has brought to us, as well as the kind of insights and perspectives that they brought to the table, have been hugely defining moments for Pandora. And in the case of 2004, it was Larry who said, not only am I going to put $8 million into the company when no one else believes in you, it's time for you to get off of this kind of professional services-esque software development strategy and move on to something that's product-oriented, that's direct-to-consumer. And oh, by the way, let's hire a world-class CEO and bring in some new product people. And so several months later, the company hired Joe Kennedy, who's our CEO, was the president at eLoan, big successful consumer mortgage company on the internet. But maybe even more interesting than that, he was the founding VP of sales and marketing for the car company Saturn. So Joe is the guy, he would never really talk about himself this way because he's kind of the most self-effacing, brilliant, Princeton-esque guy you've ever met. But he was the guy who invented the Saturn no-haggle shopping. He was, involved in the creation of the Saturn brand itself. He, was there when they decided to have the Spring Hill reunion. If you guys remember that, TV commercials, come to Spring Hill, meet the people who made your car. Joe was responsible for all of that. He also happens to be a classical pianist and all-around great guy, and came out of retirement really to get involved with this little tiny company, 6 people. That was I didn't tell you, the company was called Savage Beast through all of this. Not the worst name ever. I remember seriously agonizing over whether I should actually join a company called Savage Beast. And this is about the same time that I met with Tim. Fell in love with Tim, fell in love with the Music Genome Project, decided to sort of join arms with Tim and then Joe some weeks later when he started and try to turn this into some kind of direct-to-consumer offering. So we set about that work in the late summer, early fall of 2004, trying to figure out, well, what kind of consumer software company do we want to be when we grow up? And I remember there being 3 big ideas. One of them was, it was kind of a sidecar that lived inside iTunes that would make playlists for you. It's a smart playlisting inside of iTunes. One was kind of a music community, recommendations, learn about music, find other fans, go to concerts together, get married, whatever people do on these community things. Social networks, I guess we would call them if we'd known that's what they were. Actually, and to be candid, that was the idea that I think I liked the most. I mean, that was the one that I thought was the winner idea. And then I know that Joe's favorite was this thing that he called OneClick personal radio. At this point, the executive management team was myself and Jessica Steele, who's our VP of Business Development, Tim Westergren, and I remember that Joe was the only person that loved this internet radio idea. I remember like sitting in a conference room late one night talking about these ideas, and everybody just going, "Joe, have you ever listened to internet radio? It sucks. You know, the stream quality is bad, and when you like accidentally close your browser, the music stops, and like we can't do internet radio. It's like this, like it's like sort of like saying you're gonna do, you know." Like chat rooms or something. It just seemed very like, insidery, techie, geek kind of nobody does internet radio. But eventually he won us over. By Christmas time, we'd started doing the design work that led to Pandora. Fast forward 6 months or so of me building a team and doing the sort of user interface design work. One of the best things about my job is that God bless Joe, he's been very, very willing to kind of trust me with like what does it mean to do one-click radio. He's the kind of guy who you'll come into his office and he'll say, I've got this idea, one-click internet radio, and his whiteboard will just be covered with drawings and dialog boxes and buttons and things, and we'll talk about it and all these drawings as a way of articulating his sort of perspective on it. And he'd go, but don't make it look like any of this. Do it however you want. It just has to be one-click personal radio. You go figure it out. Go hire a team. So that's what I did. We launched the beta version of the service in the summer of 2005. And we launched it as a subscription service. I think our vision really was that it would become an advertising-supported service, but advertisers buy reach and scale. Sort of definitionally, when you start, you can't really monetize through advertising. You don't have enough eyeballs to have any advertiser be interested in you. So we thought, well, we'll validate the value proposition by making it a subscription service, and we'll give people like a long free trial. They'll be able to listen for 10 hours, and then after 10 hours, we'll ask for them to subscribe for $36 a year, or I think it was $4 a month at that time. So we built out all this infrastructure for subscription and everything, launched it. It was successful beyond our wildest dreams in terms of sort of how it began to sort of spread by word of mouth through the community. And but a curious thing happened, which was very, very few people subscribed. And I don't think that was really that shocking. It actually modeled pretty close. We had modeled that maybe 1 or 2% of the people from the very top of the funnel to the very bottom of the funnel would actually subscribe. But man, when it's a 1% or a 2% on a spreadsheet, it's one thing. But when you actually, for every 100 people you meet that try your software startup, when one of them continues using it, on its 11th hour, it feels very different. And about this time, now we're maybe 18 months later, spent most of Larry Marcus's and Walden Ventures money, starting to talk to other folks in the venture community about another round of fundraising to take us to the next level. We met Jim Foy at Crosslink. And here again, we got involved with an investor that brought not just money, but sort of analysis and perspective that really influenced the business plan. And Jim's perspective was, you guys need to get off the subscription thing and move to this advertising-supported free model sooner rather than later, because you can't afford to churn off 99% of your early adopters only to go back to them 6 or 8 months later and say, hey, now we have this ad-supported thing for you. Like, let's keep them if you really think that's the ultimate model. And so a bunch of the sort of analysts at Crosslink created the business model that demonstrated to us that there was a really big financial opportunity for Pandora in the ad-supported sphere, and So I remember maybe a week before the first board meeting that Jim was going to attend, the money from Crosslink had just been wired into our account. And we knew that they were anxious for us to move to the ad-supported free model from the subscription thing. And so my job as CTO is to be a bit of a curmudgeon and say no to everything. And so we had this meeting where I was like, well, there's lots of software to write if we're going to go ad-supported free. But it's going to take months. But we can get it done in 4 weeks. We won't eat, we won't sleep. We'll write the software in 4 weeks. And and I'm sure that I had made some concessions in the meeting. I'm sure I started off saying it'd be 6 weeks, and they talked me into 4. So we go into the board meeting. Management team lays out this whole plan. Good news, we're going to make this transition to ad-supported free in just 4 weeks, 6 months ahead of the original business plan, turn this thing on a dime. And I remember after we sort of, told this story, like you could just hear a pin drop. And someone said, but wait, I don't understand. It's free for the first 10 hours. Why can't you just make it free for the first, forever? Like it's free now. Like I don't get it. And we said, well, we can't sell any advertising. We don't have an ad server. We don't even have a way of having a named account in the system without credit card information attached to it. And they're like, yeah, those are your problems, Tom. We think the right answer is, I remember someone actually said, we think it should be ad-supported free in a nanosecond. And so left the board meeting, and 3 days later, we were ad-supported free. And one thing that I underestimated was how powerful free is with respect to word of mouth. Because we had this 10-hour free trial, and because Pandora had spread faster than we had ever thought it would through word of mouth, I thought, well, we make it free. Like, how much could that change? I mean, it's already a good story. It can't get that much better, and we're not removing that much friction. We're removing friction at hour 11, but not at minute 1, so word of mouth won't change that much. And I was fantastically wrong. And so Pandora did this sort of hockey stick thing, and not only were we dealing with kind of the aftermath of completely rejiggering the system in 3 days to be ad-supported free, but we were dealing with this gigantic, dramatic surge in traffic. And that there was a weekend right after we did that. That was the only weekend in the entire history of the company, knock on wood, where it was really like that moment in that UPS ad where the like young 20-somethings they launch their web store and they all stand around and they watch the counter go from like 1 to 2 and to 3 to 10 to 12, and they're applauding, and it's getting faster and faster and faster, and they're like, by the end they're just pale and shaking. We were pale and shaking by the end of that weekend, and the engineers that worked for me did this unbelievable job of completely rewriting some of the most critical things in the system to get us to an entirely another level of scaling. Happily, we've scaled nicely since then. Fast forward, we have 25 million people listening to Pandora on the web today. We're the largest internet radio service by a wide margin. There's, internet radio is a tiny little category compared to all of terrestrial radio. That's like broadcast radio. So we're still probably like 1% of all radio, but we are bigger than any single radio station in the country in terms of terrestrial, and our presence in all of the major metropolitan areas, New York, Chicago, LA, and such is in the top 3 of the largest stations in each of those markets. So happily have kept up with all of that growth since. Maybe I'll tell you a quick story about the Savage Beast to Pandora transition. People always want to know where the name came from. Joe Kennedy, CEO, went to lunch one day. The Billboard magazine, we've been talking about names, and he came back and there were just potential names scribbled all over the back of this thing. And I remember that there were kind of 2 principal categories that had been exploring. One was Greek myth, Zeus, Pandora, so on, and kind of musical notation things like forte. And so we did what internet entrepreneurs did. We started typing names into the address bar of a web browser to see if any of them were available. Zeus, no, duh. Forte, no, duh. And we typed in Pandora, and screen goes white, and it says, "This domain is for sale, minimum bid $15,000. And we were like, that's impossible. How could Pandora be available for sale? But sure enough, it was. And I remember, and this like naming is like a really sensitive thing. Like people were attached to Savage Beast. There was definitely a contingent that loved that name. I know. And actually, the funny thing about that is that the reason it was called Savage Beast is there's this William Congreve quote, "Music has the power to soothe the savage beast." But that's not actually the quote. The quote is actually, "Music has the power to soothe the savage breast." But I think savage breast was taken. Different kind of site entirely. So the funny thing is, that name was actually a famous misquote, and the actual person doing the quoting was Bugs Bunny. So it was a Bugs Bunny misquote was the founding name of the company that made us sound like we were all hard rockers. So Pandora's available, and I remember like literally running out of like Joe's office, like skipping like a 9-year-old girl, around in the office. "We're going to be called Pandora. We're going to be called Pandora." And I was like, "What? That's really unappealing with you skipping like that, Tom." But I was pretty sure from the beginning that was going to be the name. But we did some really fascinating sort of naming exercises to sort of convince everyone in the company that it was the right thing to do. And so we took 6 or 8 names. Savage Beast was one. Pandora was one. Mix Quest was one. Kantavi, which is some sort of esoteric musical notation thing, was one. There was one that was Schmurfed, which is it's like an acronym with no vowels, which seemed the worst name ever. It's like SMH, but it's some other esoteric musical form thing. And the test that we did was really interesting. People know about like these things like SurveyMonkey and Insight Express. These are great, really, really inexpensive tools that you can, for $1,000, you can get a, statistically significant sample of people in whatever demographic you want. Internet-connected households, certain income. Like you can ask them questions and get back answers. It's unbelievable. It's really cool. You want to know how many people have, more than one cell phone charger they can't find the cell phone for? Like you can run a survey for $300 and find out. I don't know why you'd want to know that, but you could. So we ran this test where we showed someone who's taking the survey a screenshot of the website, had a little bit of text on it describing the product, a picture of the player, and in the top left corner of the screen, there was just the name. It's just kind of plain text, like not a logo treatment or anything. It would just say like Kantavi or Pandora or Savage Beast. And depending on which segment you were in, you would see Kantavi or Savage Beast or Pandora, just one. And then you'd be asked a series of questions. What's the service for? How powerful is it? Is it something that you would use? Does it seem academic? And on and on and on. And then the last question was blank, type in box, what was the name? Really fascinating results. And Pandora was the huge winner in the final question, this question of what was the name. Pandora was like home run. Everybody remembered it. Everybody could spell it. It did kind of middling on all the intervening questions, sort of does it seem powerful? Would you tell your friends? Do you understand what it is? Which sort of makes sense because the name isn't very descriptive, so it's not adding any sort of additional weight to it. For me, the most fascinating thing, and it's counterintuitive, is that these descriptive names, like MixQuest was one of our descriptive names that do help people understand what the product is for, they do terribly on that last question. No one can remember what the company is called. It's like Mixmaster, MasterQuest, Quest Music, like no one can remember. And as you think about it, I have this problem with descriptive brands as well. And so there's actually a company, startup, that just got a bunch of press because they bought a MixQuest-esque name. And they're rebranding from something that was very Pandora-like, kind of bizarre and hard to understand why they picked that name in the first place, but memorable. And then they've now picked this thing which is like something stream or stream something, and there's been all this sort of blogger punditry about like what a great new name it is, and they finally have this name that people will understand what it is, and I find myself wondering if whether their original name really doesn't work better. So a really interesting sort of lesson about branding and naming. So, tell you a few more little stories, and then I think we'll try to move to the panel format and get some questions. One of the things that we did very early that I'm really proud of is that we had this conversation shortly after we launched that went something like, should we have a launch party? And I immediately recoiled a little bit just based on my Pets.com experience. I was like, oh man, I just don't want to spend our investors' money congratulating ourselves, having a big event. That just seems counter to how things should be done. I said, but there are these companies that are having like meetups for their early adopters, and maybe what we should do is we just put a thing on our blog that says like, we're going to be at this bar at this time. We're going to buy some pitchers of beer. If you're playing with this early version of Pandora we just launched and you want to come out and meet us and talk about music, please do. And so we had 20 or 30 people show up at this bar. And it was just kind of a magical night. Spent a tiny, tiny amount of money. I think we had T-shirts printed up and gave everybody a T-shirt. But beyond that, it was a few pitchers of beer and a few T-shirts. That was the only expense. And when it was over, we all just talked about what an amazing night it was to meet these people who liked Pandora enough in those early days to trudge out and come and meet each other and talk to us about what we were doing right and wrong. And we said, well, what if we tried to do this just everywhere we go? I mean, the management team traveled all over the country on business, and it was like, well, so when we're in St. Louis, let's do it again. Let's put it on the blog and say we're going to be in St. Louis. Come out and have a few beers with us. We'll bring some T-shirts. And so Tim Westergren, our founder, who should have been here tonight, really took this as his sort of principal role in the company. And so he has spent the last 4 years traveling all over the country doing these kinds of events with people. And they started with, the first one he did in New York City, 3 people came to Starbucks and talked with him about music for a couple of hours. And now he routinely goes to places like, Fargo, and 300 people turn up in the dead of winter to talk about music, and they are the most amazing events. Because, Pandora at its core is this very personalized experience. What it is for me, I think, is very different than what it is for any one of you, because it's really about the music that you love. And so you get these people who feel connected to a music in a way that maybe they haven't felt in a long time. I remember being at one where this woman stood up towards the end of the evening in her 50s, not this typical kind of Silicon Valley Web 2.0 hipster, I rode my skateboard to the meetup type. And I mean, she may have, but I didn't see a skateboard. And she told this story about how when she was a girl, her parents played a lot of gospel music from the LPs, and that she had felt that she had just completely lost connection with that kind of music. And now that she had Pandora, she could put the gospel music starting point into the system, and get this hour after hour after hour of music that reminded her of her childhood and exposed her to new artists. And as she told this story, she just started to weep a little bit. And it was just the most touching thing. I get a little choked up when I tell this story, because it's such a neat part of what we do. And we get these letters every day that run the gamut from. We just got one that's like a warden on, like, I don't know, do they still call them chain gangs? I guess not. And this guy plays it on his iPhone on the truck to keep the inmates who clean the side of the road mellow. And he's talking about what a great life changer it is, and we have people write in that talk about their spouse is in decline from Alzheimer's, and they use Pandora to reconnect over music. So just these amazing stories. It's really lucky to be in this sort of very passion-driven kind of category where you have people who fall in love with some part of what you do. An opportunity like this to come and tell you a little bit about who we are is sort of bread and butter for us now. And it is 100% of our marketing budget. We don't run any ads. We don't have any wacky, viral, embeddable widgetry that works in a loop that Fast Company, right? I mean, we don't do any of that. Probably should, but we don't. And so when we say that Pandora is spread by word of mouth, we really mean it's spread by words and mouths. It's people telling their friends about Pandora. Recently, we've seen a real kind of explosion in the growth of Pandora thanks to mobile. We launched on the iPhone about a year ago. We have 5 million people listening on the iPhone now. Another 1 million people listening on the BlackBerry, which launched about a month ago. And that has really, again, sort of reinforced this word-of-mouth growth, because now when you meet somebody at Thanksgiving Day, which would have normally been the most dead day of the year for Pandora because no one's at their computer, was suddenly this gigantic day of growth for us. And our theory, the only theory that makes any sense, is that people were sitting around the Thanksgiving dinner table showing their friends and family Pandora on their phones for the first time. And so really fun to see that transition taking place. I'm conscious of time. I could probably do this I can keep going? Okay, good, great. So first, the Earth cooled. Then there were dinosaurs. Let me tell you a little bit about the role of advertising, how advertising works on Pandora. Another thing I'm a bit proud of is that from the very beginning, we decided to take figuring out how to make money like as a serious part of who we are and what we do. And there was a period, I think every startup goes through this, where there were voices whispering, don't worry about monetization, build a gigantic audience, you'll figure it out, you get 20 million users, the world's your oyster. And our perspective was always, internet radio has been around for a long time, and there are a bunch of skeletons by the side of the road that actually figured out how to get millions of people listening, but never figured out how to monetize. And we figured if we're really going to, be the winner in this category, we better develop some expertise around monetizing. And so very, very early, we started selling advertising and building an internal ad sales team. And funny story about that. 3 days, remember I said in 3 days or whatever, in a nanosecond, we turned into an ad-supported free site but didn't have any advertising infrastructure. About 24 hours after that, phone rang, and it was somebody in the marketing department at Apple saying, we'd like to buy out all of the Pandora ad inventory for all of Q4 for the holidays to sell iPods and iTunes. And Joe took the call, and because we didn't, it was like 6 of us. He was, the VP of ad sales, I guess. And he hangs up the phone and, comes into my office, and he says, so Apple wants to buy out all the ad inventory. I'm saying, that's funny. We don't have an ad server, but we'll figure that out. I guess actually, if you don't have an ad server, having one advertiser is better than having 2. You just, hard code the ads onto the page. And he's like, they want to know how much it is. What's it cost? And I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. And he said, well, what about $10,000? You think $10,000 is pretty good? I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of money. Sure. So we sold Apple the month of November for $10,000 without an ad server. And, in the advertising world, like the advertising agency, like these are really sophisticated campaigns they run, particularly from Apple. And so they would be iterating on creative like right up to the last minute. And I remember getting a call on Thanksgiving Day from Joe saying, we have new creative from Apple, needs to be up by tomorrow because it's like, Black Friday or whatever. And which meant like releasing an entirely new version of the website to the the 100 servers that are Pandora, and like releasing a new version of the website is a non-trivial activity just in terms of the logistics of getting the code onto all the machines. I remember being up at 3 a.m, like pushing a new version of the website out so that we could update one ad embed tag. Right about this time, I was in on another day. I was in the cubicle of our graphic designer, creative director, and we were literally had Photoshop up. We had a medium rectangle ad. So it's that sort of ubiquitous squarish ad you see all the time on the internet. And it's like the worst ad shape. It's impossible to put it on any page in a way that looks good, but it was particularly impossible because we designed Pandora without advertising in mind, because we were building this subscription thing. And we're literally like in Photoshop, like moving this rectangle around going, no, it looks like hell there. It looks like hell there. It looks like hell there. And this woman comes into the cubicle with Joe, and Joe says, oh, I'd like to introduce you to Cheryl Lucanegro. She's talking to us about being our vice president of ad sales. And she's like, oh, hi, I'm Cheryl. And then she looks at the screen. She's like, oh, my God, do not put that there. And so my relationship with Cheryl was born in that moment. She became our VP of ad sales and built this phenomenal team of sellers all around the country. We have about 40 people who sell ads today. And we have really embraced this idea of working internally, of having a team of people internally that work like a mini creative agency. So that when an advertiser comes to Pandora, because we don't, well, in the beginning at least, we didn't have tremendous reach. We didn't have lots and lots of eyeballs. So the thing that we could sell them was things that they couldn't possibly do on any other site on the internet. So we have all kinds of ad products. This one is a really bad example, although a moment ago there was an ad product up on the screen that was a big kind of almost like takeover ad. So here's an ad for Rock Band, and you can see that the actual the ad itself has sort of taken over the entire surround around the player. So much like an ad you might get in a magazine, so 2 pages, really engaging, something that brands have a really hard time doing on the internet. We also have ads that interact with the player, so an advertiser can make radio stations that live inside the ad unit. When the user interacts with them, they play music inside of Pandora. We have all kinds of sponsorship things. So during the holidays, an advertiser can come in and just own the station creation process around holiday music. It's another fascinating tidbit. During the holidays, 20% of the music that's consumed on Pandora is holiday music. 20. Joe was right about that too. I didn't want to believe that was possibly going to be the case, but that's just tremendous demand for holiday music during that period. When what are we in? Global economic collapse. When that started, I feel like we were, in a much better position than many of our sort of industry peers from the standpoint that we had really been thinking about this question of monetization from the beginning. We did $20 million in revenue last year. We'll do double that this year. Despite the sort of downturn in advertising spending, Q2 is our biggest quarter ever. Q2 this year, we're tracking about 80% over Q2 last year. The advertising story on Pandora is actually pretty rosy at the moment, and because of that, it's given us a little bit of leeway to look at other things. And so actually just this morning at about 3 a.m, my team and I finished pushing out a new product that we call Pandora One, which is a sort of premium subscription product. So kind of, what's old is new again. We are back in the business of offering a subscription offering, which is sort of predicated on having a sort of totally pure Pandora experience. So it eliminates advertising, it streams at a much higher bit rate, so you get much higher sort of CD quality music streams. There's a desktop application, so you don't have to have the browser window open. You have this sort of small player that actually has a lot of the sort of design character of the iPhone application, but running on the desktop. So we've been enjoying the day-to-day of rolling that out and seeing people respond to it. So it's fun to be able to tell a little bit of a story that starts with subscription and comes back to it. So I think I'll probably end my comments there and let the panel pick up.
Thank you, Tom. So now I have a few questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and then we'll open it to the group. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We've got a great team here. We have Bud Carr, Hale Milgram, John McFarlane, and David Kremen. And we have people from the music industry, from the record industry, from a music-related startup in town, and a venture capitalist with a music industry background. So it should be a real great panel. So I have a question for David Kremen. And one of the questions I have for you is from a venture capitalist perspective. How would you advise Pandora if they were one of your portfolio companies?
Well, we looked very closely at Savage Beast 100 years ago. And so I think we probably would have had some of the same kinds of input that you got from Larry Marcus and Art Berliner and the team over at Walden. Today, I like the fact that they're trying to figure out how to go from beyond ad-based to some other revenue-producing models because the economy has sucked. A lot of companies which were growing as fast as Pandora, companies got tremendous valuations just for having that kind of footprint. Companies like Skype or whatever. So Pandora got all this action and should have had a huge valuation, and now is stuck in this sort of waiting period. I think maybe it might be how you feel at this point. But if they come up with lots of other revenue-producing areas, I think they're going to be just in the driver's seat in about 2 to 3 years.
So do you think that Pandora owns the customer and that it's a defensible long-term play?
Right now, I do think they own the customer. It'll be very interesting to see how models shift over the coming 5 years as mobile begins to take over. Pandora will probably shift to more mobile device ability, and that's going to be the interesting area because there's a lot of people playing in that area. But I think Pandora owns a customer today because I go to where all my music is. It's Pandora. Why would I go anywhere else? But as people take it outside on the beach or in their car, how does Pandora follow them? And whoever comes up with that solution, I think, when some of the folks on this panel were in the record business a few years ago and they owned the distribution, that was great. Now distribution is democratized, so record companies have had a hard time owning the customer anymore. Perhaps Pandora is beginning to own them, but whoever really owns the same song across all the devices going forward, I think they begin to own the customer. So it'll be interesting to see what Pandora does. By the way, that was a great story. Just great.
A great story. Okay, so Bud, I have
Savage Breast.
This is PG-13 up here, Bud. No. I have a question for you, Bud. So in the film music industry, one of the things I'm sure you need to work on is really staying abreast of what, no pun intended, with Savage Breast, staying on top of what's new and the new artists. So my question is, do you or have you used Pandora, or do you see a fit for Pandora to aid you with doing that?
I hadn't. We did have I think it's 3 years ago, we had a USC intern, film music student, very talented girl who was now working for Michael Giacchino, who just scored Star Trek. But she worked, I think, for you guys doing it, because she was telling us this process of, okay, so the guitar note is this, and then we wrote this down, and I'm sitting looking at her going, I don't, as you explained it, it has to be tedious. Do you still do that? I'll get to your question. Do you still do that? It's all done human?
Yeah.
God bless them. Kind of the electronic arts theory of churn 'em and burn 'em. They just eventually evaporate.
It's actually a really coveted job. We have people waiting in line for the role because it's really designed around the lifestyle of a professional musician. They can come in, they can work 20 to 30 hours a week at whatever schedule they want. They can take a 8-week leave of absence to go on tour. Most of them are professional touring musicians. Some of them have gone on to great success. The bassist for the Decemberists was a music analyst. Sheryl Crown's drummer is a music analyst. The keyboard player for the Counting Crows on this most recent tour is a music analyst. So, not to be dismissive, but it's an underemployed group, and they're waiting in line.
Well, back to your question, to get to that. I haven't used it yet, but I'm actually going to use it tonight to get to a point. I was introduced, not unlike you mentioned, a friend said, have you tried? And I said no, and you should. And so I actually did find, and just from the standpoint of a consumer, what I do for a living is what he described before. A director will say to us, you know, I want this song, but we probably can't afford it, or I want something like this, and find it. So we have staff that does that, or I'll do it. And it used to be all of these guys at record companies that would send us and turn us on to new music. Well, since the music business doesn't exist anymore, you have to go try and find it. The internet is a place to find it. There's a lot of people who are, but the resources are limited. So I'm going to be very interested to see if what I find by putting in, and what is my search tonight? Oh yes, it's Widespread Panic's version of Werewolves of London for a very specific scene, and it doesn't quite work for us. So we're going to see if we can find Pandora driving us to something that eventually works for the director. It's worth the test. I do. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Cool.
You have the microphone. You can do anything you want.
Absolutely.
So, my directors have. How do you find your artists? And what type of deals do you make with your artists?
Sure. You know, as a company of musicians, I mean, about 60% of the people who work at Pandora have a night job as a professional musician. It was really important to us from the beginning to create a service that achieved all of these goals, but did it in a sort of a legal context that ensured that artists and labels and songwriters were all getting paid. That's one of the beautiful things about internet radio, particularly, is that there is a statutory license in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that basically says if you play by these explicit rules about what you're allowed to do with respect to the kinds of streams you put together, you can play only 4 songs by a particular artist in a 3-hour period. System can't deliver song on demand, and so on and so forth. You're eligible for this statutory license, and so we kind of carefully crafted our service to play by all of those rules, and then we pay BMI, ASCAP, CSAC for the songwriter copyright, and we pay another clearinghouse called Sound Exchange, which distributes money directly to artists and to record labels. So we benefit from the statutory license. We don't have to have direct deals. We're only available in the United States as a result, because we don't have that same kind of legal cover in other parts of the world, although we would love to bring Pandora to the rest of the world, but it will involve going label by label, country by country, and doing direct deals. Not to mention going to the songwriter organizations in each geography as well. So tons of licensing work ahead of us to make Pandora a truly international story.
How do I get my band on Pandora?
Right. So how do you get your band on Pandora? A couple of different ways. We have a team of curators whose job it is to sort of scour the musical universe for content. So they do everything from ensuring that we have every single thing that is ever charted to everything that's ever been written about, on things like Pitchfork or, zines about country music or underground hip hop. So it starts with it's our job to find it, is sort of pass number 1. Pass 2 is it's the artist's job to send it to us. So we get probably 1,000 direct submissions a week from artists recording in their garage. We listen to every single submission. About half of the music that's submitted to Pandora ends up getting played on Pandora. And I think would be sympathetic to that being the right answer if you listened to the submissions that are sent to us. I mean, and this means no disrespect to these artists, but they're not all ready sort of for radio style play yet. They're sort of developing their talent still. And then the third thing, which may be the neatest thing, is that because Pandora's user experience is all about, tell us the name of an artist or song that you love through just typing it in, you don't sort of browse to it. Every single person who comes to Pandora tells us exactly what they're looking for. And so we can go through the kind of failed station creation attempts, if you like, and go, oh, we're missing this artist or this song. We were the first place in the United States, I think, to play James Blunt when he was breaking in the UK, because we were seeing people putting him into Pandora, trying to find him, and we're able to go out and get that content as a result.
So I have a question for Hale. One of the things that we all think of when we think of Hale Milgram is Things Like Hell, which is a music series in town that many of us have belonged to or do belong to. And what I love about it is it brings artists to town and introduces me to artists that I hadn't necessarily heard about or would know about. So in some ways there's like a parallel piece going. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are, because I know you have a very kind of eclectic interest in music and how you think that might fit or not fit with Pandora.
Well, that's first. I think I've learned more about Pandora tonight than I've ever known. I am a throwback to the prehistoric age of the music business, when you would go to a club or whatever, and the opening artist would be somebody you've never heard of, and you were blown away. You just loved it. You were extremely passionate about it. You went there to see whoever the headliner was, whoever the main act was, but the real passion comes when something hits you in the heart and soul. And I think whether it's the Things Like Hell series or going to the bowl, the Santa Barbara Bowl, or whatever we may be doing, I think you have to experience all these different possibilities. And I think that's one of the keys that I'm trying to figure out, how Pandora has a broader shift than you type in the artist that you love or that you care about, and then you start hearing all these different possibilities, but they all fit in a similar genre. And my thought process is just sort of the opposite. It was always, how do I turn somebody onto something they never heard of, that they gave me a clue. When I used to work in retail record stores, they gave me a clue of what they liked, and then I could sort of bend that rule and give them something that they never would have thought of. And that's, to me, that's something that we're losing in this new frontier that we're in, which is pushing that envelope and being opened to something that you never would have thought of. And I think as much as Pandora does, which is extremely positive, because I know a number of people that love Pandora, but they're also the same people that don't really want to listen to too many new things. And they don't want to go to an artist and see the opening act. They want to just go see the artist that they're familiar with. So it's an interesting, idea of how I could use Pandora by putting in a number of different eclectic artists and get a pretty amazing listing of different musical treats. But I don't know if most people, generally speaking, do that. And I don't know, and let's put Pandora aside for just a moment, I don't know if that's done most places nowadays. I think that's one of the things we're also losing with that one-on-one that you had at a retail record store, that you could go in and you could sort of get a vibe on what an employee might start turning you on to, and you might check out something that you never would have given the opportunity to. Because a lot of it is the way that you get exposed initially. If you have a positive experience, you're willing to let somebody go deeper into the album, or, excuse me, the CD, or whatever it may be. And that's, to me, the real joy, is being able to hear all of these musical possibilities that are in all these different genres of music that a lot of people have been turned off to. So that's something that I'm sure that there's a way to get around that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I tend to agree that that's, maybe the single biggest failing of Pandora. One thing that I didn't talk about is that this whole music genome thing, which was the foundation of the product, the only thing we did when we launched, is kind of severely flawed. We use this musicology to put songs together, and then people give thumbs up and thumbs down, and so we can tell, like, kind of empirically how we're doing. Song that overwhelmingly gets a thumbs down, bad job. Song gets overwhelmingly gets a thumbs up. At least for the average sort of user, that's probably a really good fit. And so, over the 4 years since we launched, Pandora's playlisting algorithm has dramatically changed and is now at least 50% sort of social, if you like, looking at the sort of aggregate thumbs up and thumbs down behavior. And the music genome now is like one tool of many that we use to generate an initial hypothesis about what music you might like. And the interesting thing is I actually think the music genome actually does make a bunch of these connections that are more tenuous. You know, you say you like the Indigo Girls, we might play a Metallica ballad for you that's just a unbelievable Indigo Girls match. There's such a song. And then the community kind of comes in and weighs on that suggestion, and the social dimensions come into play then. And so there's a question about, can the Indigo Girls fan wrap their head around, I like the musical work, you know, that's going on here, and that's been fascinating. But I agree, like in terms of the thing you're talking about, going to a record store on Haight Street in San Francisco and talking to the tattooed guy behind the counter, you get a different kind of musical discovery moment than you get on Pandora, and that breaks my heart a little bit. Although I suspect you and I are so far out of the mainstream that we don't. It's hard for us to realize just how much it means to make these other kinds of connections that Pandora can make.
The great part, to me, the such a positive part of what Pandora does is it opens people up to different artists than they would typically be listening to right away. And that's the real key, is how do you develop, whether if I was putting my record company hat on or my retailing hat on, it's how do you turn people on to new music? No, whether it's in the same genre or not. Because it's very, very easy to get caught up in the next U2 record or the next Sting record or whomever it may be. And if you're a fan, you immediately want to buy that CD or listen to it. And it's how do you consistently open yourself to other possibilities? And thank you for saying the kind words about things like Hell. The moniker for the series that Peggy Jones came up with, the lady that started the series almost 12 years ago now, is the greatest music you've never heard. Now that's sort of like the opposite thought process of what we would be seeing from a marketing standpoint. That somebody would come to us and say, what? You want to say it's the best music you've never heard? Why? So to me, it sort of fits into. That's
a high wire act too.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing to do, is to make someone love a song they've never heard before. The best predictor of whether you're going to like a song or not is whether you've heard it before.
And I don't want to get away from Pandora and what we're trying to do here, but it's sort of like this group of individuals that we've had, subscribers for the last 12 years. They keep on coming with not knowing probably 90% or 85% of the artists that are going to be playing. And that's why whenever I'm sitting and talking with anybody, I'm always trying to hog not only the time, but try to get people to open up. Because music is one of the most important things for not only our souls, but for our creative abilities. I think it's a part of this cultural situation that we've gotten into for the last 20, 30 years that's really lost, whether it's at the educational, at the school standpoint of having funding dropped or whatever. Music is, I can't even imagine what I would have ended up doing. Maybe I don't know what I would have done if it wasn't for being turned on to music when I was very, very young by my mom and by my family. And I think I think Pandora, in a lot of respects, is doing a great service on that standpoint. I just want to try to figure out how can it open it up to all these other.
Well, I'm starting to see a lot of parallels here, because I personally see now Sings Like Hell reminds me in some ways of what you said with working in a record store. You get a customer that trusts you. Well, that's what we trust. We just go in blindly and listen to whatever you've chosen for us. And I think in some ways that same thing's happening with Pandora. You know, I'm trusting you, and slowly I get more trust with your choices. So
You cannot imagine how frustrated people get when we violate that trust. The emails we get on the other side is like, you played Bette Midler on my such and such station. Dude, it's Bette Midler. And then of course we have tens of thousands of Bette Midler fans on the service, but like, there are these polarizing moments where people are like, wow, you really violated that trust that I've given you.
You have to put Beast of Burden by Bette Midler.
Okay.
Has a killer version of that.
So I have a question for John. Last time I looked at your Sonos website, I saw Pandora on there. Can you just explain a little bit how Pandora fits in with Sonos and how it's affected your business? Or
Well, for those of you not familiar with Sonos, we make a music system for your home, and the mission of Sonos is fill your house with music and do it from anywhere on the planet. So Pandora was a perfect partner for us. What we aim to do is really reinvent the home stereo, so that you buy a Sonos unit for whichever room in the home you want to listen to music, and then you can listen to whatever you want in that room. So it fits really well with Pandora, and what we find is we have a really high attach rate once a Sonos subscriber tries Pandora, and it's a simple trial. They'll use it. So something like 65% of our customers, and Pandora is only available in the U.S. The U.S. is about 40% of our market, but about 60% of our customers use those subscription services. So it's a pretty high attach rate, and they're pretty happy. I think Tom would tell you they stick with Pandora for a long time, too.
It's the best way to listen to Pandora. It really is. It's fantastic. Sonos is one of those products, if you haven't had a chance to touch it, it's like, to touch it is to want it. I mean, it's just everybody who you put, it has this big, beautiful kind of controller that where you can just push music all over your house and synchronize them or not, and get Pandora and Rhapsody and all of your local music, and it's for a music lover, it's just heaven. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people who just become instant converts when you show it to them.
My children are the best example. Pandora gets about 80% of the listening in our house, and Hale, the numbers, if you go out and look, and we get a lot of private equity and venture funds coming in saying, boy, because some of them will go out and do surveys and look for business opportunities, and they say, boy, if you look at the numbers, there are more people worldwide listening to music than ever before by a long shot, and it's increasing at a pretty good rate, and they're listening to music more than ever. Now, I think the Apple iPod was and the original Napster were big roles in this, but it's available in more forms. And I mean, my 7-year-old has such a wider eclectic taste in music than I did at 7. I mean, it was impossible to have that at 7, right? Unless it matched your parents.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, with the death of the music business, as far as the sales aspect of it, and finding places to buy things, and your record store being gone, and Amazon being the only place, and trying to figure this out. I don't have to pay for my music; people send it to me. But when I first tried Pandora, I put in a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, playlist, and I was working on the computer. And all of a sudden, I'm listening to a version of For What It's Worth by Stephen Stills, and I had the pleasure of being his agent when I was younger. And I'm going, I've never heard this. And so I took your clicks and found out that it was an album that was released 6 months ago of demos that were 40 years old that he found. Now, I should know that. Somebody should have told me about it. No, but I'm not talking about in my office. I'm talking about in the business. I mean, the people who represent that particular record and the publishers, it's their job to make me know about it. Well, through your service, I found out about it, and through iTunes, I bought it that day. It just click, and it's now mine. So I think that the ability to sell material for some of these younger artists who have no way of really exposing themselves, I think that's something that we have to look forward to from your company.
We tell you a little bit about music sales in Pandora. So every song we play, you can click through and buy the CD from Amazon, digital tracks from Amazon, or iTunes. It's a pretty easy process. You can even build up a big playlist and buy them all with a single click. And we sell today about 1 million tracks a month through these services. It's 12 million tracks a year. It's not a very big number. So $12 million total revenue. Well, it's a big number. I mean, it is. I mean, we are the biggest. Yeah, we are the well. So, but here's what's actually exciting about it. $12 million in revenue to the music industry today. Our portion of that is 6% of it, so it's not a ton of revenue to us, which is fine. That's not why we do it. We have other ways of making money. We don't need to make a large amount of money selling music, but we're still very, very interested in selling music because fundamentally radio is a discovery medium, and we believe in artists getting paid. The way they really get paid is by building fans and selling music, and that's all transitioning, but still selling music is a big piece of it. But to quickly do the math, so we sell, let's just call it 10 million songs a year to make the math a little bit easier. And we know from our own research that for every song that someone buys by clicking through on Pandora, there's another 4 songs that we've influenced that they buy directly from iTunes or at retail. So it's 5 songs total for every one that we see. So that's 50 million songs, $50 million in revenue. But we're only 1% of radio. So if the Pandora model, not Pandora itself, but if the Pandora model becomes 100% of radio, it's not Clear Channel, but it's services like Pandora are 100% of the market. So we can do 50 million, 100 times that is $5 billion, which is bigger than the entire recorded music industry, digital and physical combined in the US right now. So the potential for the record industry, the recorded music industry for services like Pandora is bigger than their total opportunity today. So, we really, and the interesting thing is 6% of even that biggest number still isn't a ton of money. So it's not about us. It's not about the principal form of revenue for Pandora will never be selling music, but it's a lot of money to the rights holders, which is great, which is why we do it.
So I had a thought.
And by the way, they're paying rights that radio never paid before. The radio paid blanket licenses to artists, and I say a blanket license that could be as little as $200 for 1 million artists, and never paid the actual recording companies any money. So the artist, if you didn't write the song, you never made any money. They're doing that differently now.
So, Bud, I had a thought as you guys were talking. Back to your agent days, how Tom mentioned that, they found James Blunt because people were asking for it. I'm starting to think forward as a potential of the requests on Pandora being used either by the artists when they're negotiating or by the agents or the other side when they're negotiating. It's almost like a predictor or precursor to success in some sort of way. Does that make any sense? Or
it does, but with the music industry, trying to reinvent itself from a monetizing standpoint, we're thrown back to we're actually back in the 60s and 70s where, small groups, independent labels are very happy, selling 5, 10, 15,000 CDs and a band touring and just being able to pay the rent. So the fact of a medium that will expose those things in a correct way and help monetize it, I think will be effective. The negotiating factors, the big record labels are dead. They're just not going to, as someone said before, distribution is something that needs to be reinvented, and this is part of the reinvention.
This is such a fascinating topic for Pandora, and I think one of the things that in the Pandora story that's yet to be written is sort of this idea of Pandora for artists. Like, what will be the value proposition beyond helping them sell music, beyond royalties that we pay that they ultimately receive in the forms of royalty distributions, but what can we do with them to help them in this new sort of music economy? I had dinner with a guy named Aaron Ray last week, who is a artist manager, manages people like Limp Bizkit and Korn and Enrique Iglesias, and we were talking about just this changing landscape and what Pandora might be able to do to help his artists, and he said the thing that you alluded to, which is, he's got an artist in his portfolio that had 3 or 4 years ago a huge #1 hit. You all know it. You could sing the words. It won a Grammy. They haven't released a sophomore record, and it's a conundrum for him. Like, he just doesn't know how to help these kids make a sustainable career out of it. And he was just saying that it's much easier for him to take a band that still has their rights, that has a ton of talent, and that is interested in a career that's about a close relationship with 20, 30, 40,000 fans, who wants to do the work of touring and merchandising over not an 18-month period when they're, on the Hills soundtrack, but over 30 years. And that his goal really is to create an environment where, you can have a low 6-figure income from being the guitar player in one of these bands. I mean, and honestly, you would be, I have no idea about how much money people make in entertainment. Like, it's just a mystery to me, but I'm starting to get a picture of what, the guitar player for the, say, I don't know, the New Pornographers makes. It's not very much money. I mean, you can be, on the end cap at Best Buy, selling what appears to be lots of records, to be on the tip of the tongue of every hipster in every city across the country, and still be making, the kind of money that a school teacher makes in Indianapolis. Touring in Japan, all the some side benefits of stardom, but it's not a huge monetary opportunity for many of these talented people. And so I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for having Pandora help these artists optimize their careers. Where should they tour? Who should they be touring with? And even maybe to the point of what offers should they be making to their fans? How should they package material? Should they package it, as singles or as vinyl or in conjunction with concert tickets or with merchandising? And it's just a really rich, interesting area.
I'm going to keep the agent hat and manager hat on for a second. Let me say that I have an artist, a young artist that is on Pandora and is starting to do very well. If I said to you, can you tell me what areas of the country, could I get a feedback and say, you should tour Chicago, you should tour San Francisco? Do you have that type? And is that information available to someone like me if I asked you?
So we certainly have that data. We haven't productized tools for sort of mining it. I can and will tell you about other artist affinities. So here, when your artist songs get played on these stations, here's where it's really liked. Here's where it's not so liked so well. So maybe you could set up tours and things, opening acts and those kinds of things. The geographic stuff is the next step for us, and then turning that all into a system where we can do it not just onesie, twosie for people who come to us and specifically ask, but to create a whole portal for the artist to come in and get that data. Really want to do that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Boy, at a record company, I would have loved to have that kind of information. That's like the precious gold. Yeah. It's interesting because as you were bringing that up, I was thinking about a project that I worked at when I was at Warner Brothers Records back in probably the latter portion of the 70s, and it was the first Dire Straits record. And they had this song, Sultans of Swing, and when I first had the opportunity to hear the cassette, I believe, it may have been an 8-track. It wasn't a 4-track or a reel-to-reel. But when I heard it, I fell in love with this song, Sultans of Swing. And at the time, there was a gentleman that actually lives in this community. Eddie Rosenblatt was the head of marketing of Warner Brothers at the time. And I kept on going to him every week after a marketing meeting and saying, I love this song. Can I continue spending money in merchandising and supporting the retail community, because radio wasn't touching it yet. But there was one station after about 8 months of me hassling Eddie over and over every week, KSJO or KOME up in San Jose, that started banging the heck out of it, and it took off. And then it sort of spread, but it spread just like you were talking about, usually regionally, and then it gets larger and larger, and then we ended up, I think, after about 14 or 15 months more, selling about 1.8 or 2 million records. But the subsequent records came out, and this goes back to what happens with so many artists. The subsequent record came out, and I think it was called The Letter, I'm not sure. But it didn't do well. In fact, they didn't do well in America for many years. They took off in Europe, and they became huge, like over the top. And I think either the I Want My MTV song or Love Over Gold was the next beginning for them in the US. But that was probably 5 or 6 years later. And so there was all this time that their album sales went from that 1.8, the second album I think sold 300,000 or 400,000, and then 200,000. But that's the conundrum of what happens today, in a strange sense, because everything is so set up for that immediate quarter, or how quickly can we have success, without allowing the artist to really develop and grow in a organic fashion. And that's going to be an interesting thing for everything that we've been talking about, because more people may be listening to music than ever before. But let's see how many of those artists in 10 years, 5 years, whatever, are the artists that you're still going, wow, what an incredible creative group this is, or artist. And whether it's James Blunt, who also had an unbelievable album everywhere in the world, that first album, the debut. I think the second album has had a much more of a struggle, which is very typical. It's almost called the sophomore flop, or it's almost the kiss of death in a strange sense, for a group to have the type of success that any of us could possibly be fortunate enough to have that type of success. You always want it to happen, but in a strange sense, it makes it very difficult for that group or artist going forward.
Hale, I think you're exactly right. And when you watch, I have young children, and not that young anymore. They're age 11 to 20, but they consume stuff differently. And so I think Pandora fits their model of consumption better than yours and mine from our era. And I think you're going to see more flashes in the pan because of that, because the information is so thick and fast on every subject. And our kids eat it up differently from the way we did. And I'm not sure it's bad, but I sure know it's different.
So since we talked about the role of terrestrial radio in breaking Sultans of Swing over an 8-month period, I got to tell you one quick story about something similar happening on Pandora. So when we started the service, it was wholly musicological. Like, we didn't know about popularity. We didn't have the thumbs up and thumbs down data. It wasn't influencing playlists. Sort of beyond your own stations were influenced by thumbs, but the sort of aggregate thumbs weren't influencing anything. And each day I would get a report of the songs that were spun the most on Pandora. And every single day, for month after month after month after month, this song called Curve of the Earth played more than any other song on Pandora. And it was a fine little song. But there was nothing particularly remarkable about it. That's unfair. It was actually it's a very good song, but it was by an artist that no one had ever heard of. Happened to be local to San Francisco. Had a major label deal, but had been dropped. And we just algorithmically, through luck, spun this song more than any other song. We would joke, it's like at the center of the music universe. Every single song leads to this song eventually. And the artist's name is Matt Nathanson. He got a major label deal, which he at least in part attributes to this experience on Pandora. And he now has a top 20 song in the Hot 40 or whatever it is, like the hardest chart to break into. And he's like singer-songwriter. It's like that chart there's not singer-songwriter stuff on that chart. So he just came by the office and actually played a little set for us. It's one of my favorite things that's happened is that we helped him find this audience.
Okay, so I'm getting a lot more insight into Pandora as well and thoughts, because in some ways, the fact that you spun it so many times is like a marketing research. It's like that song had components that were desirable to a really broad audience. Right? Does that make sense?
There's a company out there that also believes in this sort of musicological analysis approach, although they use more machine listening than we do. And their entire business plan is about helping the music industry identify hits. And it's something we don't particularly believe in. There's this apocryphal tale about, well, I don't know if it's apocryphal. There's this story about it figuring out that that Norah Jones song, Come Away With Me, was going to be a big hit before it was a big hit. And so maybe it works. I don't know. We don't particularly believe that we've solved that.
Okay.
There's something magic about music that I don't think anything Pandora is doing captures.
Okay. So, David, I've got a question. You're the venture capital investment arm here. And so there is so much flux in the movie and the music industry these days. Do you see it as a desirable investment industry right now? And do you have any investments in your portfolio? Or are you still kind of sitting back and watching it settle?
I made a lot of early investments, and I have none of that money anymore. and I've been looking.
A land war in Asia is more appealing than getting into.
I thought I recognized you from bankruptcy court. And I have been quietly watching, ready to pounce. And I have seen one service that intrigues me because it takes the experience that you have with the Sonos, where it kind of goes with you around your house, and you walk out with it, and it's in your car, you walk out with it, it's in your handheld, it's on your iPod, it's wherever you want it, and it's all, the same songs. And my favorite part about it is they have actually figured out a business model to monetize even the songs that we've all stolen. And that's as a former recording artist, it's actually, it was important to me to get these royalty checks. That's how I ate. It was, and playing live shows. It certainly wasn't record sales or anything like that. So I think there could be some major shifts, and I think, Pandora is one of those pieces that's made it shift. Being able to walk around your house, you've been able to make it shift, and watching how people consume content across the board, there could be a very big play here, but I'm still a little nervous.
Talking about the outside the home part, it's we've done these great implementations with people like Sonos for the living room, and we've had this great early success on mobile phones, the iPhone and the BlackBerry and Windows Mobile and such. And we'll be launching on the 6 on the Palm Pre, which is a phenomenal phone platform. Really, really excited about Palm's new stuff. But the most interesting stuff that's happening that you're not hearing about yet is in the automotive space. We have unbelievable partners working on Pandora in the car. Ford has actually been really active this week talking about Pandora for their Sync platform. It's pretty remarkable and very real.
So I think I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. The question was that the iPhone has an app for Pandora, and it's free. And the question is, why is it free? Why don't you charge something for it? And he said, I would happily have paid for it.
God bless you for being willing to pay for it. That puts
Checkbook right now.
that puts you in a tiny minority. And that's really, at the end of the day, that really is sort of the thing, is that it actually doesn't put you in a tiny minority, because there's a large number of people who say they would pay for it. But then when you actually charge for it, it's like a whole different thing. There's sort of two different ways to go about making music services available and to try to make money. One is to charge people sort of a subscription fee or a per app fee, if you like. And I think all of the evidence suggests that the market for that in the U.S. is very, very, very small. I mean, Rhapsody, who have a fantastic service, have thrown hundreds of millions of dollars at trying to convince the country that an all-you-can-eat music service is a great value. And they've got like 1 million subscribers and another 700,000 people who get it for free as part of their Comcast subscription, and that number just doesn't grow. by comparison, there are 150 million people who have listened to radio in the last 24 hours. And so you can and so Rhapsody's a pretty good business. You get 2 million people, $160 a year, or whatever Rhapsody costs. You do the math, that's a lot of money. And if you're satisfied with serving a couple million people, you can build a very successful, profitable business, I think, with sort of subscription or for pay music services. Pandora is more interested in changing the world. And you can't do that with a subscription service, I don't think. Now, I just said we just launched a subscription service. We hope to sort of have our cake and eat it too. But I think our principal efforts over time will continue to be, focusing on the 150 million people who want to consume music in an ad-supported model, as opposed to building things that limit our scale but maybe derive immediate revenue opportunities. Just to give you a sense, all the data I have suggests that if we charge for our iPhone application, we would have about 2% of the installed base that we have today. It's about 2% of people are willing to pay to go for a paid version over the free version. So the question was, will this kind of approach put conventional radio stations out of business? I mean, without speaking about who will stay in business and who won't stay in business, I think the way that I think about it is that the broadcast medium has tremendous inefficiency to it. It's geographically sort of limiting. You can't do any personalization. Forget Pandora. Forget personalized playlists. Let's say that the winning formula is DJs spinning records to a sort of mass audience for the shared cultural experience that kind of thing affords. I still think internet-style, bi-directional, wireless communication infrastructure is hugely preferable because it lets you target the advertising. It lets you deliver exactly the ad to exactly the person who wants to hear that message. And so your ability to monetize it goes through the roof. So it seems to me that ubiquitous wireless infrastructure with internet-like capabilities is like a done deal. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, but eventually your car and everything you own is connected to this ubiquitous internet-style wireless infrastructure. I can't come up with any good reason why we're still broadcasting from towers. And so part of my job is to try to make sure we're the best in the world at delivering music over internet-style connections by the time this all plays out.
I think radio's going slowly bye-bye.
Wait a minute, you can't say that.
Yeah, you get people take a long
time. I have a radio show every Sunday morning. Slowly, very slowly.
One thing that doesn't change is people take a long time to change. So,
right.
The younger people are the quicker adopters, and so terrestrial radio isn't gone to, they're broadcasting on the internet too. But I agree entirely with Tom. Once you've tried the experience of a Pandora, and if you're a music lover, you're just, the next time you go to an internet radio station and you press the skip button and it doesn't do anything, you're done.
Yes.
I'll grab this at least for a minute. It's completely disrupted the industry, and my perspective is that it's a devastating loss. And I think we've gone through this period where it was a very polarizing issue, where you had a group of people who, and I actually put myself in this category, that just find it kind of like it's stealing. That's my take on it. It's stealing. These people put their blood, sweat, and tears into creating this work that they own, and then other people decide for them that the best thing for the artist is for them just to take it for free because then they'll tell their friends about it, and that's somehow good for the artist. So I put myself in that camp. I think it's sort of this horrible thing that's happened. And then there's this other camp, which is harder to project myself into, but I know that people feel very passionately like, music wants to be free. Like it just does. It wants to be free. And copyright is obsolete in the world of bits. And there's this, this, and you particularly talk to young people about this, and like this is not a moral issue for them. at all. Music just wants to be free. And we have been in this period of antagonism for the last many, many years around those two polarized camps. And Trent Reznor, who's is Nine Inch Nails, has been doing a lot in this space of trying to figure out like what's next. And I actually think that he has this perspective that has the potential to resolve that conundrum. And Trent says, it's wrong, it's stealing, it's not fair, it's messed up, but it's over, it's done, it's the way of the world. So I have to find a way to focus my energies on making money in the new music economy rather than staying in this polarized viewpoint, complaining about how horrible it is that this has happened. And I think it will be really interesting as the industry sort of begins to adopt Trent's perspective, which I think he's right. I mean, I think it's like, it's over, it's done. We can't, to stay in the camps and complain about it is unproductive and really dangerous. So I'm optimistic that we can move to this phase where we resign ourselves to the situation and look for new ways to make sure that artists and labels and managers and all the other people that make this kind of art happen can continue to do their work.
I agree with what you just said and what Trent Reznor thinks. It is the cat's out of the bag. So this is where innovation should occur in terms of business model, which is why I'm interested in this one company that seems to be able to track even stolen songs and pay the rights holders, to how an artist will find a way to make money. The live show becomes a lot more important again. I think back to, we used to laugh at the Grateful Dead. You'd go to every show, there'd be 600 people up front taping, and the record would be out that afternoon, and yet they seemed to make a lot of money, and everyone shared the songs, stole them, so to speak, and they authorized it. And I think that's the model that people will continue to go for now is, what's unique about this particular experience that we can charge for, whereas the recorded song has stopped being a unique experience as distribution is free and democratized.
I think to wrap it up is that there's an opportunity even where initially it sounds like it might not be. Just look at each piece and spin it from a positive manner and look for the opportunity there. That's entrepreneurship. In the back?
Sure. I can restate it. So the first question, is sort of a neat thing that he mentioned, which is that through some of these social tools, things like Twitter, there's now an opportunity to have to be able to observe artists and that you care about in a way that with a level of intimacy that you've never been able to before. I mean watching Trent on Twitter actually is really interesting, and it's been hugely humanizing. And actually it's really interesting to watch how it interacts with the brand of Nine Inch Nails, because Nine Inch Nails, who I've been a fan of for 15 years, it's this very angry thing, and at least Trent's not angry. He's not angry at all. He seems like actually a really nice guy. And I'm gonna go see him on Friday, and I'm sure on stage his persona is gonna be he's gonna smash the synthesizer and do the whole Nine Inch Nails shtick, and it's interesting to watch that. But that's not your point. Your question was about Blip, which he mentioned. I'm finally coming out of my shell.
I was worried about that.
Yeah. You asked about Blip. So Blip is this service that lets you play DJ and say, play this song, play this song, play this song, play this song, and then kind of Twitter style, and then anybody can come and listen to stream songs. Fantastic way to share music. It's a little weird from the standpoint that it sits on top of aggregating music from other music services, things like iMeme and music videos on YouTube, and Rhapsody's 25 songs for free API, but hides all of the infrastructure, the sort of user experience infrastructure around the edges of that. So you don't see the iMeme ads, you don't see the YouTube ads, and this stuff, this is outside of the spirit of why the record labels gave those licenses to YouTube and to iMeme, well, not gave, but sold those licenses to iMeme and YouTube and Rhapsody. And so these kinds of services, where Blip actually doesn't pay any royalties to anybody at all, under the argument that those underlying services are paying royalties are in their own way hugely disruptive. Someone's going to get sued. And I think it's actually a fascinating area of copyright to see where that will go. But just to be explicit about it, the thing that Blip does is impossible with the licenses that Pandora has. But it's a cool service, but it's in a tremendously gray area with respect to copyright. And what was this? The second question was about Pandora's data and the stuff we're throwing away. You're right. I mean, there's tremendous opportunity for that data. We are really one of the things you specifically said is it would be really cool to be able to see like who's hearing, like aggregate statistics about what's being played at any given time, what's maybe popular. There are no top 10 lists on Pandora for two reasons. Pandora's a pretty mass market service these days. If you really wanted to see what was being the top 10 most spun songs on Pandora, like go look at the Billboard charts. That's what people want to hear. That's what plays on Pandora. We have 600,000 songs in our catalog. 520,000 of them have played in the last 7 days. So we play, and 50% of our catalog is independent music. So we play more indie music than anyone else. But really, the top 10 is the top 10 is the top 10. Pandora doesn't fundamentally change that. So it's kind of uninteresting to publish those statistics. And then the second thing is that Pandora, I think, succeeds because it's a personalized service. To the woman who came to our meetup and told us about gospel music, her experience of Pandora is all about gospel music. She could care less that, Rihanna's new single is the most spun thing on Pandora. And in a way, it depersonalizes it for us to tell her that. Because it brings in dimensions of the music universe that aren't about her anymore, they're about the crowd. And so there are lots of places to get that. There's nothing wrong with top 10 lists. They're part of the shared zeitgeist. It's all good. It's just not who we are. And so we're reluctant to do that, go to, the end cap at Best Buy or to the Billboard charts or whatever if you want to find out what's popular.
In the back with the blue. So the question is, with all the social media out there and with Twitter, how is that converging with Pandora, and also why hire music analysts when you could be using one of those methods to be doing what you're doing?
Well, there's two things. I actually really like Twitter a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. And I'm actually really, really excited that it's entered the sort of mass market sphere. I mean, this ride that they're on is really sort of phenomenal. And you'll see us integrating Pandora with Twitter in a more profound way now that they have the kind of reach to make it something that's not just a head scratcher for our audience, but sort of part of something that they have as a shared cultural reference. You'll be able to tweet the music you're discovering, the stations you're listening to through Twitter in short order here. In terms of music analysis, everybody focuses on kind of ideas that kind of orbit around, here's a way for Pandora to get rid of the music analysis team that we have, which I guess from the outside would seem like something that would really appeal to us. And there is some cost associated with it for sure. But whether it's through machine listening or crowdsourcing, it's not really something it's not something that's broken about our business. It's a sort of insignificant cost in the grand scheme of things. Licensing and bandwidth are just orders of magnitude more expensive than the music analysis work. In terms of keeping up with new music that's released, we don't have any problem doing that. So if it was a problem, like we would probably put energy on fixing it through something like crowdsourcing. Or using like Mechanical Turk, Amazon service to identify people who could do piecework of music analysis who have the right skills. I mean, there's a whole bunch of really interesting things you could do. It's just not really broken right now. So we have lots of things that are broken that we focus on instead.
So what is his biggest fear for the company, and how are they addressing it?
Oh, that one's easy. So 2 years ago, so we talked about the statutory license which is the mechanism under which we get to play music, the rate that you pay for that license isn't actually set in the law. There's a copyright kind of tribunal that meets every 5 years to set the rate. And these judges, these copyright judges, hear arguments from the webcasters on one side and the rights holders on the other. And the webcasters take some kind of unreasonable position, like it should cost a third of what it costs today, and the rights holders take some unreasonable position, like it should cost 3 times what it costs today. And any sort of natural, healthy negotiation, it would land somewhere in the middle, just like when we go to buy a car. 2 years ago, this tribunal met to have this debate about rates, and that debate went on for 6 or 8 months, and the judges heard both sides of it. And for kind of arcane legalistic reasons, the rate that they arrived at was the rate that the rights holders had asked for, which is sort of triple the old rate. Which actually put the entire industry in like a pretty awkward spot. On the one hand, I think everybody understood, even the rights holders, that it was an untenable rate, that internet radio could not survive if the rate tripled. It was kind of in the careful what you asked for category. I mean, they just really didn't think they'd ever get what they asked for, and they asked for something that was unsupportable. And so for the last 2 years, we've had this kind of sort of Damocles hanging over our head with respect to, are we going to be able to negotiate a rate that actually allows internet radio to survive, not just for Pandora, but for the entire category? And so you have seen Pandora out maybe in the press, the New York Times, or maybe even emails that we've sent you saying, we need your help, we need you to write to your Congress people and ask them to help with this issue. And our listeners have turned out in droves to do that, and have driven legislative change and a negotiation process that I'm more optimistic than ever is going to lead to revised rates that will allow Pandora and the entire internet-connected radio world to survive, which is not just about Pandora and internet radio, but is fundamentally about the future of this medium that 150 million people listen to. So this is about really everyone, the Clear Channel and CBS Radio and your favorite local station, and because internet radio is radio 10 years from now. And so I'm pretty proud of the work that our listeners have done to ensure that rate is revised. But it's still the single biggest risk to the company for sure. We work really, really hard to try to get that back in a place that will work, but it's not resolved entirely yet. I think it's going to get resolved, but until you have a signature, it's still the biggest risk to us.
So the question is, what does the panel think the music companies, where they aired maybe 10 years ago, and what might be able to be done to regain their business?
Milli Vanilli?
From my viewpoint, it's been something that I think that's been going on for the last 20 years, maybe 25 years. I don't think it's any one thing. I think one of the obstacles that happened, obviously, in the last 15 years was Napster, and the decisions that the record companies made to try to stay the course. And kids didn't care about staying the course. They never do. They didn't care about staying the course when I was a kid. But I think a lot of it boils down to greed at the end of the day. And people don't want to hear that, but I think that it just became greed-oriented. It was greed for the record companies to maintain the same profitabilities that they had maintained in the 30 years as they were growing their business. And greed wasn't good. And I think that there's the artistic side, the creative side of the artist and the group. That's one thing. And then there's the business side. And back in the 60s in particular, and the early 70s, it really wasn't a business. It was the music business. In the last 25 years or 20 years, it's become the business of music. And I think that just had a normal, you can't have this incredible growth that the record companies went through in the 60s and early 70s and 70s and then 80s, and then not have a change, a cultural and sociological change that started going on, and that young people didn't have the same feelings that I have about wanting to have, one, a physical item. Just think, how many of you still go out and buy CDs or whatever? You don't need to. Don't tell my wife, because she knows how I've been keeping this vault, this museum, this whatever, of all the music, all the different configurations that do or don't exist anymore. And I think that we at some point, I think the record companies at some point lost a view of what the youth really cared about, which was getting the music. And I think it's something that a number of the people on this panel have been very, very smart in being able to recognize and to listen to the young people and do things that really are so mobile that you can go anywhere and do anything, and you don't have to have, oh, I have my stereo system at home and it's got to have the best quality, whatever. Kids don't care about that in most cases. They've been listening to computer speakers, and I think all of that has been a long-term effect that's happened at the music business level, and it's taken us to now where you have all this incredible portability, and you have this ability to have great sound if you want to pay for it, and at the same time, the music business has to redirect its thought process of how they're going to be involved going forward, because there will always be great artists, always. Whether or not you're selling millions of CDs or you're just listening to Sonos at home or whatever we're doing, Pandora, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, music will always be here. It's now a matter of how are we smart, and obviously the people that are up here have been very brilliant in the direction that they've been going to get the music out to people, because people are responding. And at the end of the day, that's what makes it work. I think that the record companies lost sight of that about 20, 25 years ago.
I think that's all. That's a fantastic answer to the question. I'm going to answer it from a slightly different angle. And I'm going to go back further than 10 years, and this isn't going to be popular, I don't think, but just hear me out. I actually think the fundamental mistake where the genie was let out of the bottle was the CD format without any kind of copy protection. I think, and so there's two pieces to this. I actually am not proposing that the world would be a better place if there was DRM to music. It clearly wouldn't be in many ways. But if they made a mistake, it was 20 years ago. It was releasing this pure digital format that had no form of controls on it at all, and no legal framework in the U.S. to protect against perfect digital copies being made ad infinitum. And so if there was some kind of copy protection in the CD format and some kind of anti-circumvention law like there is in the DMCA 20 years ago, you wouldn't have iTunes that can rip CDs, on every computer. You wouldn't have Windows Media Player that can rip CDs on every computer. And it would have set a different perspective, I think, in the consumer's mind about what they got when they got a CD. That the rights that they had in terms of where they could transfer it, how they could transfer it, were not entirely fluid. And the reason I bring this up is because I do actually think we're seeing a slightly different thing happen with film and video content. And they've done two smart things. Your sense, it doesn't feel like a God-given right that you can make as many copies of the DVDs you buy as you like. I think we all wish that it would be, but it doesn't fundamentally feel like they've taken something away from me by having a DVD not be rippable by iTunes. And then they're doing a second smart thing, which is that sort of slows down the momentum towards music or film piracy. And then they're doing the second thing, which is the critical thing, is that they're making video content available through lots and lots and lots of different means. I can get a stream of Lost with commercials the day that it airs on television. I can buy it and watch it on lots of different devices from lots of different sources digitally. I can go and buy the physical DVD at retail. And so I still think that the film industry is at tremendous risk for this same thing playing out again, but at least it's unfolding in a way where the consumer and the rights holders are kind of taking the journey at least a little bit together.
Yeah, I would answer it a little differently. I would say that the record industry lost their entrepreneurs. So they didn't respond to changes because I'd actually take a position that I think you'll see tracks monetized again. It's just, unfortunately, for a 10-year period of time, when the original Napster came out, people in school who always stole music, people borrow cassette tape from somebody else and copy it, or borrow a CD, they always did, and that was accepted. But when they got out of school, they, came clean and started buying again, right? There are differences, but then that generation, as they could download 100,000 tracks, and that became their listening library, they'd get out of school, and there was no way for them to buy anything. The CD wasn't relevant to them anymore, and you couldn't buy a track. It had this crazy thing called DRM, and you had to know who you bought it from to who you could play it on. And that'd be like the recording industry selling, CDs that played on, the player that you bought from somebody, but not on this one, and the whole industry would have not taken off if it had done that. But they lost their entrepreneurs, so they couldn't make a value chain work, and then tried to hold back the technology. The video industry, I think, is walking down the same path, but they're a little younger as an industry, and so they're trying more models. But you watch the same behaviors happen. And it's just a bigger file.
Yeah.
So the question is regarding what protection does Pandora have?
So the fingerprinting thing that Shazam does is actually pretty fundamentally different than the kind of genetic music genome project thing that we do. And the Shazam thing happens to be very patent encumbered. There are lots and lots and lots of patents about all the different techniques you can use for song identification. So in the case of Shazam, they're fairly well protected by patents, although they certainly have competitors who do song identification based on algorithms that aren't covered by their patents. And I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't read their patents, but that's my sense about that particular space. So Pandora has patents that cover many aspects of what we do and how we do it. But I got to tell you, I think as often as not, ego stands in the way of duplicative efforts. I mean, honestly, Pandora launched. Launchcast existed as it was a personalized radio service from the biggest brand on the internet at the time, Yahoo. They had over 10 million listeners, by far the biggest. And I remember talking, just to Joe about it's just comical to think that we can take these guys on and have any hope of ever having Launchcast-like success. Because Pandora had two things. It had the Music Genome Project, which is foundational, but I'm not sure required. And it had a very, very, very simple user experience, like kind of Google-esque invitation, tell us the name of one artist and we'll take you on this musical journey. And I was sure if we got any traction at all, that Launchcast would just copy it. And I think what stood in the way of that happening principally was they really believed in their approach, which was, hundreds of steps in a genre tree and one station, not multiple stations, and social influencer, like all this stuff. And the idea that they would take that all away and turn it into this simple thing that Pandora was, I think their kind of ego kept them from doing that, because that would be this indication that we had figured something out that they hadn't. And I see that happen time and time and time again in product space, where you go, gosh, why wouldn't they just do that? And I think it's just because their ego won't let them.
Sonos wouldn't exist otherwise. Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap it up for the evening, but the panelists will still be here, and you can come up and ask questions and talk to each other. And thank you all for coming, and have a good rest of your week.